Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and this is actually part 10 of my Whispers of the Old Gods card review. I can't believe how many cards have already been revealed, but I've got 3 new ones today, and in fact, a couple of them are the craziest cards I think we've seen yet, and perhaps maybe even some of the strongest cards we've seen yet. So let's dive right in to the first card. It's the 8 mana, that's right, 8 mana Hunter spell, Call of the Wild. I'm so surprised because hunters typically don't get that many expensive cards, particularly spells that are this big. But as you might guess from the artwork here on Call of the Wild, it has an effect that summons all 3 of the animal companions that you randomly get normally from the card Animal Companion. That means you might get Leok, which is a 2/4 that buffs all other minions' attacks by 1. You might get Huffer, which is a 4/2 with charge, or you might get Misha, which is a 4/4 with taunt. With Call of the Wild, you get all 3 instantly, which means you're getting a 4/4, a 2/4 that buffs attack, so it's really like a 5/4, and a 4/2 with a buffed attack that's charging, so it's a 5/2 charge instantly. So 3 really strong minions split across 3 bodies that all have very powerful and meaningful effects, especially in the late game, is really, really good. This is going to sound a little crazy to some people, but this is a card you could almost compare to Dr. Boom, in that Dr. Boom is 7 mana, summons 3 reasonably valuable minions, which means for 8 mana, you can totally load up the board with stuff or recover a board that has been cleared. And it seems like Blizzard is definitely skewing Hunter towards the late game a little bit so far with the Whispers of the Old Gods cards that we've seen. And this is the kind of card that's a great resource. If you've got a couple minions already in the late game, you're going to instantly buff their attack and have 5 damage to send to the face or clear a minion that's in the way. If the board's empty, you're still going to refill your board, which is nice with a variety of minions that do different things. Sometimes just having 5 direct damage late in the game is almost like a free fireball or kill command, right? So there are a variety of ways that this is good, and it's going to be so consistent, which is really the only downside of Animal Companion, which is already a good card. Plus, 3 Animal Companions would cost 9 total mana, right? And it would take 3 theoretical cards in your deck, which of course is impossible. So this has the benefits of a mana cost reduction. It doesn't thin out your deck quite as quickly, so you can draw deeper into your deck without going into fatigue. So there's just more resources and more value bundled into a single spell. And as far as I'm concerned, Call of the Wild is just incredibly good. I don't see any downsides with this card other than perhaps, the occasional counter spell that might block this thing, but that's going to be such a rare occurrence, and you'll have so many ways to play around that I don't even think that's a valid concern against mages. So all upside with Call of the Wild, one of the best cards in the set so far, absolutely fantastic in every way. So let's move on to the next card. This time it's another spell, but it's the 3 mana Spreading Madness, and it's a Warlock spell. And it does 9 damage randomly split among all characters. So this is a bit like Avenging Wrath for Paladins, but there's a downside in that it can hit your face as well. So like many Warlock cards that tend to damage your own hero, there is some downside here. But there will be scenarios where I think Spreading Madness might be okay, kind of as like a super-powered arcane missiles. If you're behind on the board and your opponent has, let's say, 2 or 3 minions, the likelihood that most of these random hits are going to land on something of your opponent's is much higher than it's going to hit yourself. Plus, often as a Warlock, you're okay with sacrificing a little bit of health to gain an advantage. So if you kill a couple minions or hit them for 3 or 4 health in the face, it probably won't be too bad if you only take 1 or 2 health yourself. And that will typically be the kind of scenario in which this card is played. But then there's also, imagine it on an empty board, right? There's a chance you're going to hit the opponent on average for about 4.5 damage. Of course, it will either be 4 or 5 on average. But doing 4 damage to the enemy's face for 3 mana isn't necessarily bad and might win you the game in some cases. So there are ways that you can even dig out a lethal with this card. The real problem is Warlocks traditionally include cards that have a lot of imps. So 1/1 token style minions, both in Zoo and even in like Reno locks. They tend to run Imp Gang Boss and Implosion. And this card is terrible when it comes to those, because you'll increase the likelihood that all your imps die, and the probability that your side of the board will be impacted is much higher than the opponent's when you have 4 or 5 minions. So this card would only work in very specific kinds of decks designed to utilize it. And even then, I'm not sure it will work fantastically well. I think this is kind of a niche card that we might see from time to time. It will definitely provide some highlights for fun videos and stuff. And there may be some decks designed around kind of a chaotic element that Spreading Madness can provide. But I don't see a perfect fit for this card anywhere just yet. That said, I think it has potential, and it's not a bad card. So who knows what kind of home this card could find eventually. So let's move on to the final card of this video. It is yet another one of the 4 old gods. In fact, the final old god that has been revealed. It is the 10 mana Yogg-Saron, Hope's End. And this is without a doubt, I think, the craziest card Hearthstone has ever seen. It is unlike any other card yet. Of course, it's a 10 mana card like the other old gods. Its stats are 7/5, which, you know, is not particularly great for 10 mana. In fact, it's pretty bad. 5 health means it's very likely to die very quickly, even if it manages to survive its own battle cry. And 7 attack is pretty meaningless at turn 10 too. I mean, it's nothing bad, but you're not playing this card for the body by any stretch of the imagination. You're playing Yogg-Saron for the battle cry. And listen to this. Cast a random spell. For each spell you've cast this game, targets chosen randomly. So that means if you've casted 10 spells throughout the game so far, casted a couple Frostbolts, a couple Fireballs, a couple Arcane Blasts, some Arcane Missiles, that means if you've casted 10 spells, that when you play Yogg-Saron, he's going to cast 10 random spells as soon as he hits the board. Totally random spells. That means they come from any class. They can be damage spells, card draw spells, defensive spells. It doesn't matter. Any random spell. If they have a target, so it's like a Fireball has a target, that target will be chosen randomly. For cards that have words like give yourself 5 armor, like Shield Block and draw a card, that will just affect you. So Shield Block would give you 5 armor and draw a card. You could also Fireball yourself, Fireball the opponent, Fireball a minion. Even Yogg-Saron himself can be Fireballed based on his own battle cry. And if that does happen, if he dies before all the spells resolve, Blizzard has confirmed that the spells will continue to fire off even if he's dead. So it's going to happen no matter what. So playing this card basically just results in the most chaotic moment imaginable. And as for whether or not it's good, that's very, very hard to say. There's so much RNG, that is randomness, impacting what happens with this card that it's almost impossible to guess that it will be positive or negative when all is said and done. I will say that generally, I think, my own opinion is that you'll probably win out more often than you'll lose out. There will be games, of course, where you Fireball yourself 5 times and you kill yourself instantly, because that's how RNG works, right? But there will be other scenarios where the damage spells are just as likely to hit the opponent as they are you. So you might, you know, Fireball them twice, Fireball yourself twice. That's a wash. But you'll also get that occasional Shield Block that gives you 5 armor and draws you a card. You'll also occasionally clear a really valuable minion that they have. There are a lot of spells that benefit yourself first and foremost. And in fact, between the damage spells and those, the damage spells have a 50-50 chance to benefit you. All the cards that benefit yourself no matter what have a 100% chance to benefit you. So when you start thinking about the odds, it sure feels like more often than not, you're going to get a bigger benefit than your opponent. That said, this card can also be played and controlled only in scenarios where you want it to be played. So in other words, if you have 3 health left, you're probably not going to play Yogg-Saron. But if your opponent has 3 health left, this is probably worth the gamble, right? As long as you have 20, you expect yourself to survive, and it'd be more likely that your opponent will catch that random Frostbolt and die. So between the way spells are designed in the game, between the control you have over playing this card, I think more often than not, it's going to be the results will point in your favor as opposed to your opponent's. And I think they'll even do so pretty significantly. So I think there's a lot of upside to playing Yogg-Saron. That said, of course, a gamble is a gamble, and a well-designed deck shouldn't have to rely on chance to win. So that said, I don't really believe that there are going to be decks designed specifically to play this in a competitive sense. Obviously, everyone is going to take this card out on day one and see how crazy it is, myself included. I'm going to try to make 1,000 highlight videos off of Yogg-Saron immediately. That's going to be the first card I craft if I don't open him. So sure, he's going to be played, but as the expansion wears on and people get used to the effect and the fun kind of wears out, I don't think this will ever be the centerpiece of a really competitive tournament level or ladder style deck. But I would love to be proven wrong, because I do think there's a little bit of potential here. So that wraps it up for this video. That's Yogg-Saron, Spreading Madness, and Call of the Wild. Definitely a few of the craziest and perhaps strongest and at least most impactful cards in the game so far. So I can't wait to see these in action. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I always appreciate the discussion. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, game on.